In this section we are going to look at the muscles, and as these are the structures you are looking to affect the most, it's important to understand how they work, what their characteristics are, and the roles they play. You will find the notes in your manual under Unit 1, Section 5. As a sports massage therapist, you will have a direct impact on the muscles. If they are not in good health, i.e. free from knots or adherences, tightness and injury, they will not work properly. This then has an impact on the other muscles and structures around the problem area, and any issues will slowly escalate, causing secondary problems. So as a massage therapist, what are you looking to do? Put very basically, you are trying to return the muscles to good health, maintain them, and in some cases prepare them for an event. We will discuss these topics properly when we look at the practical side of sports massage, but for now a brief explanation. By returning muscles to good health, you are looking to remove or improve knots, loosen tight tissues, and encourage effective healing of injuries. This isn't just through your massage skills, but also the advice and guidance you give your client. When maintaining muscles, you are endeavouring to prevent the build-up of tightness and knots that can impair a muscle or lead to injury. When preparing someone for an event, you will be encouraging blood flow to the muscles, helping to warm them and encourage suppleness, while also stimulating the nervous system to be ready for action. Knowing a muscle's position and range of movement will make you more effective at your job, enabling you to figure out issues quickly and allowing you to give your client the best advice. There are 3 types of muscle: cardiac, smooth and skeletal. Our interest as a sports massage therapist lies with skeletal. Firstly, we will look at the common factors between the 3 types of muscle, then each muscle type individually. All muscles have 4 characteristics: contractility, extensibility, elasticity and excitability. So what are these? Contractility is the ability of muscle tissue to contract or shorten. This creates a force and in the skeletal muscle reduces the angle of a joint, causing a movement. Extensibility is the muscle's ability to stretch and lengthen beyond its resting length. Be aware there is a limit to the extensibility of a muscle, and if you pass this, there is potential for injury. Elasticity is the muscle's ability to return to its original shape and length after lengthening or shortening. Excitability means the muscle can be stimulated. In other words, it will respond to a stimulus or message from the nervous system, which it will respond to. Cardiac muscle, or myocardium, is only found in the heart, and you will see shortly it is similar to the structure of skeletal muscle in the fact that it is striated, meaning it looks stripy, but rather than being in uniform lines as in skeletal muscle, it is organised more like a network, branching off and rejoining. The good news about cardiac muscle, unlike skeletal muscle, is it does not fatigue. It works continuously and is under involuntary control. In other words, we have no control over it. You will be looking at this more when you cover the nervous system and cardiovascular system. A couple of facts to note. The cells of the cardiac muscle are self-excitable, so they do not need an external stimulus, and the heart is controlled by the sinoatrial node, abbreviated to SAN. Smooth muscle, again, is involuntary and is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. It makes up all the pipework of the body and can be found in the urinary, reproductive and digestive systems, as well as blood vessels. Rather than the striated tissue cells found in the other 2 muscle types, these are flat, tightly packed cells, giving it its smooth appearance. As a sports massage therapist, you can indirectly affect both these types of muscle via the nervous system and the potential calming effect you have on your client. But don't think you can cure medical conditions such as reducing high blood pressure through massage. From the point of view of a sports massage therapist, we are really interested in skeletal muscle. This is also referred to as striated muscle because it has long, thin muscle fibres that make the muscle look stripy. Skeletal muscle, from now on referred to as muscle, cross over a joint and join bone to bone via a tendon. It is under conscious or voluntary control, under the somatic nervous system, so we control it. We must make a conscious decision to walk, talk, or perform a massage move. Muscles create movement by pulling on the bones. One cannot work without the other. You need both the lever and the effectors. So if the muscle becomes detached or the bone is broken, your movement at that joint will become impaired. The other factor to consider in muscle movement is every muscle has an opposing muscle. So not only do you need the lever and the effector, you need the opposing muscle to relax as the effector contracts. This is called the agonist-antagonist relationship. We will go into more detail with that shortly, but for now, if the opposing muscle does not relax, the muscle trying to contract cannot do so. When treating muscles, it's important to consider both the muscle with the issue and its opposing partner. Another reason why knowing your muscles is important. Muscles always hold a degree of tone, and different groups of fibres within a muscle will switch on and off. Not all fibres will contract at once to create the tone, but some will rest and some will work, preventing fatigue of the muscle. This allows us to stand and hold ourselves upright without effort. The structures of the skeletal muscle is really quite interesting, and it is made up of lots of layers, which allows it to do the incredible things it does. We have talked about the 4 muscle characteristics, but muscles can also be made bigger, smaller, and to a degree longer with the appropriate training and patience. So let's work our way through the layers of the muscle. The muscle tissues are protected by collagen-based membranes, which eventually form the tendon of the muscles. These membranes are called fascia, meaning bandage, and is found everywhere in the body. These layers of fascia, as well as protecting the muscle, allow the muscles to slide smoothly over itself and other structures. The outermost membrane is called the epimysium, epi meaning upon or over. This encapsulates the entire muscle, and within it you will find bundles of muscle fibres called fasciae. Each fasciae bundle has its own fascial sheath called the perimysium. Peri meaning enclosing or surrounding. Within the fasciae you will find bundles of muscle fibres. These are wrapped by the endomysium, endo meaning inside or internal. These muscle fibres are made up of myofibrils, and these contain the contractile proteins or myofilaments. This is where the muscle contraction actually takes place. The 2 myofilaments that create the contraction are actin and myosin, and are arranged in chain-like sections called sarcomeres. Looking at the contractile elements, myosin, also referred to as thick filaments, and actin as thin filaments. These run the length of the myofilaments in sections called sarcomeres. These are the contractile unit of the muscle. The microfibrils are made up of lots of sarcomeres. The actin look like a double twist of pearls and are anchored to each end of the sarcomere at a point called the Z-line. So when the myosin pull the actin pulls the 2 ends of the sarcomere together, creating the contraction. The thicker lengths you can see with the golf club heads, correctly known as myosin heads, are the myosin proteins. These heads are responsible for hooking onto the actin and pulling the actin proteins together. The movement they create is known as the sliding filament theory. This is your muscle contraction. As you can imagine, the sliding filament theory is not that simple. Adenosine triphosphate, ATP, is the body's energy currency, a high-energy molecule. The body is constantly using ATP, so to make access to it easy, it is stored in the muscles in low levels, which are constantly being replaced. When the molecule is broken down, it produces a burst of power. ATP is needed by the myosin head to be able to move into position to attach to the actin. This is known as the cocking phase. This molecule primes the myosin head by binding to it. This won't trigger the contraction though. We need calcium too. Molecules at the binding site on the actin block the myosin from attaching until calcium ions come along and move them out the way. This allows the myosin heads and the actin binding site to bind or create a cross bridge. The calcium is stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, SR, which is found within the structure of the muscle cells. When calcium is released into the fluid surrounding the myosin and actin, this fluid is called sarcoplasm. This is known as the binding phase. This allows the myosin heads to rotate and pull the actin to the centre, creating the power stroke. Once this is complete, the whole thing needs to reset. At this phase, ATP reattaches to the myosin heads, which causes it to release from the actin binding site, and the actin and myosin return to their original state. They are at rest. For all of this to happen, you need an action potential, a message from the nervous system. The nervous system and action potentials will be covered in your next tutorial. So let's recap the four main stages of the sliding filament theory. Cocking phase. ATP is broken down, releasing energy which primes the myosin heads. Binding phase. Calcium ions clear the actin binding site to allow actin and myosin to attach. Power stroke. The myosin heads rotate, pulling the actin towards the centre of the sarcomere. Resetting phase. ATP binds to the myosin head, releasing it from the actin binding site. These muscle contractions don't happen randomly throughout the muscle, and not all the muscle will necessarily contract at once either. Depending what you are trying to lift will firstly determine how much of the muscle will contract. But also muscles work in motor units, and either all the muscle fibres in that unit will contract or they won't. This is known as the all or none law. A motor unit consists of one motor neuron, a nerve that brings back messages from the brain to cause an action, and all the muscle fibres that neuron innervates or activates. Depending where in the body the motor unit is and what the main function of the muscle is, will affect how many fibres there are in that unit. For example, a motor unit in the quad may consist of thousands of fibres but only one neuron, but a motor unit in the hand may only have 5 fibres, where more intricate control is required. If a signal is sent to a motor unit, all the fibres will contract fully in that unit. They don't contract partially if something is light or fully if something is heavy. More or less units will be stimulated to create a stronger or lesser force. Motor units are typically made up of one type of muscle fibre, either slow or fast twitch, and depending whether more or less force is required will depend what type of muscle fibre will be recruited. Slow for less effort and fast for more effort. Not all muscle fibres are the same. We generally have a mix of fibres in the body which have different properties. And if you do a lot of specific training, you can have some but limited impact on these fibre types. However, they are mainly genetically predetermined, which will indicate what type of sport or training will suit you best. Very simply, you have fast twitch, slow twitch, and intermediate. Intermediate fibres can be changed to behave like fast or slow twitch fibres with the right training. Slow twitch fibres tend to be better for endurance exercise or activities such as long distance running. They are also found more heavily in posture muscles. They have better oxygen take-up, produce less force, but are resistant to fatigue and work aerobically with oxygen. Fast twitch fibres are better at rapid, powerful movements, so good for sprinting. They don't take up oxygen so well, produce much more force, work anaerobically without oxygen, and tend to fatigue more quickly. Fast and slow twitch fibres are generally the opposite of each other in structure and therefore in function. Slow twitch fibres have a small diameter, larger myoglobin content, more mitochondria and more capillaries than fast twitch. Slow twitch tissue is also red, whereas fast twitch is white. So let's move on from the structure of muscles and have a look at what they can do. Muscles contract in different ways. The terms used for the different contractions are isotonic, which divides into concentric and eccentric, isometric, isokinetic, and stretching. It is important to understand the different types of contraction and how it impacts the muscle, as they can be very important in rehabilitation. Isotonic contraction is what you would recognise as an ordinary movement, so for simplicity, a bicep curl. This is divided into a concentric movement, which is the muscle generating a force and getting shorter. This is the up phase of a bicep curl, also known as a positive phase in training. The eccentric movement is the muscle generating force and lengthening under control, or the negative phase. This would be the down phase in a bicep curl. Isometric is the muscle generating a force while staying the same length. There is no change in the length of the muscle or the angle of the joint, so a plank would be an isometric exercise. In an isokinetic muscle contraction, the movement is performed at a consistent speed throughout the range, and specialist equipment, a dynamometer, is required. Toning tables use this principle. Finally, stretching. This is when the muscle is lengthened. The origin and the insertion of the muscle move away from each other. Unlike eccentric movement, there is no force and the muscle is relaxed. You are working past its normal resting range. If you were rehabilitating an injury, you would start at the appropriate level for the injury, but the running order would be isometric, eccentric, concentric, and stretching either passively or actively where appropriate. I mentioned earlier a term called agonist-antagonist relationship. These are two of the roles the muscles can take. When we perform a movement, muscles will take a different role. These are agonist, also known as the prime mover. This is the muscle that will initiate a movement. For example, in extension of the knee, the quadricep group would be the prime mover. Opposite the agonist, you have the antagonist. This is the opposing muscle, or the hamstrings in our example, and these must relax or the quadriceps cannot contract concentrically. Next up is the synergist. This is a helper to the prime mover. So the prime mover initiates the movement, the synergist then helps. In the example of knee extension, there is no true synergist, but for hip extension, the glute max would be the prime mover and the hamstrings the synergist. Understanding your synergistic muscles can be very important as a massage therapist, as many dysfunctions can arise from these muscles becoming over-dominant, but we will discuss this fully in Unit 3. Finally, fixators. The fixator's job is to hold everything steady, so these guys will contract isometrically. A good example of this is the shoulder girdle muscles, stabilizing the scapula, allowing shoulder movement. Last but not least, muscle attachments. As I have said, muscles attach to bone via a tendon. This is the muscle attachment site. They are classified as the origin and insertion, so which end is which? The origin, often written as O, is the start of the muscle, and in most cases doesn't move during a contraction. It is normally the attachment that is most proximal, closest to the midline. Some muscles will have more than one origin, but there is usually some indication in the name. Biceps brachii, bi, two heads. The insertion, often written as I, is the end of the muscle and is usually the most distal point furthest away from the midline. This moves closer to the origin in movement. Getting to know the origins and insertions will help you to better pinpoint the muscles and decide which muscle may be causing the problem. The individual muscles have been grouped into limbs, and we have created their own tutorial to make it easier for you to go back and forth between them. This covers everything you need to know about the structures and functions of the muscles, and will form part of your theory exam. You will now be able to complete the tasks for the muscles and will then be able to move on to the muscle groups themselves.